On Iran, you called it an excursion. You said it would be over soon. Are you thinking this week it will be over?
No,
Are you talking
but soon.
about days?
I think soon.
Okay, and with respect
Very
to...
soon. Look, everything they have is gone, including their leadership. In fact, there are two levels of leadership, and even actually, as it turns out, more than that. But two levels of leadership are gone. Most people have never even heard about the leaders that they're talking about. So it's obviously been very, very powerful, very effective.
That was President Trump yesterday. Hello, Joe.
Yep.
Telling reporters the war with Iran could end soon while touting the success of the U.S. military. But during that news conference, he gave conflicting statements about the future of the conflict that do not align with messaging from his administration. That's just one of the several angles we're following this morning, including new reporting that the president would support the killing of Iran's new leader if he doesn't agree to the administration's demands, plus the dramatic impact on the global economy, with oil prices spiking at one point yesterday to the highest level in 4 years. And the growing questions, Joe, about the deadly strike on an elementary school in Iran. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you know, we're different from other countries. We're supposed to be different from other countries. When we make horrible mistakes in warfare, we admit it. We need to admit it. And this is a situation where it certainly looks like all the evidence suggests that it was an American Tomahawk missile. Iranians don't have it, as far as anything I've ever read. And so, yeah, we were aiming at a naval base. There was tragically a school nearby there, and that missile got guided in, and the intel must have had that as one of the 4 buildings on in the naval base area. So, again, it seems really obvious that that was a terrible, terrible, tragic mistake, and we are Americans. We need to admit those terrible, terrible mistakes. Regarding confusion yesterday, you know, Willie, everybody's so confused by what Donald Trump's saying. Oh, 1 second he's saying we're staying there for the long run. That, you know, he's not going to telegraph exactly what he does. I'm still stuck on what he said to me a couple of Fridays ago, which was it's going to be a really interesting 2 weeks. And he said that repeatedly on the Friday before those strikes. Now, I'm not really great in math, but that time frame that he talked about repeatedly to me on the phone would end this Friday. I don't think it's going to be that neat. But at the same time, if Donald Trump is saying everything under the sun to either confuse the Iranians or to confuse his political adversaries, that's not much of a surprise. That said, it's interesting yesterday, he says, oh, well, this is going to be pretty short. Tell CBS News. It's going to shorten it up. And that's when the markets were collapsing. Oil was over 100. And it's almost like he was going downhill too fast. The markets were going, and he just pumped on the brakes. Oh, no, we're going to end this soon. And what did the markets do? They immediately reversed. And, in fact, I was out at a ball game, and I looked at the stocks and saw everything turned, and we called Jesse Rodriguez. I go, Jesse, what just happened? He goes, what do you mean? I go, the markets. Like, oil went from being 10% up to 5% down. I said, oh, Donald Trump just told CBS it was going to be a shorter war, and then he went and told the Republicans something else, and then he told the Republicans something. You know, I think right now it's pumping the brakes. Yesterday, when oil was exploding and trying to send the message that this war is not going to drag on, even if in the next breath he's saying this war is going to drag on and on.
Well, yeah, and the messaging is conflicting not just within the president's own message, but within the administration, because you had President Trump saying that the war is, quote, very complete yesterday, and then backpedaling on that a little bit. And then you had the Department of Defense saying we have only just begun to fight, putting out a statement saying that the war effectively has only just begun. He's used that 2-week formulation many times over the course of his two administrations. In about 2 weeks. It'll be done in about 2 weeks. You've heard that on healthcare and all kinds of different things. So we always take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, the messaging has changed. The messaging changes sometimes within the same thought from the president about when this war will end and the progress that the United States is making. You had Secretary of State Marco Rubio talking about the rationale for the war yesterday, saying this was about taking out their missile capabilities, no mention of the nuclear program or regime change, which we haven't seen yet, as the Supreme Leader's own son now is in power. So I think it just leads to, in the American public, the markets and other places, a sense of confusion about, number one, what the aims of this war are, and number two, just how long it might last. As you say, he's not going to telegraph that for strategic reasons, but it does seem that he gives a different answer on it, Mika, every time he speaks.
Absolutely.
Well, he really does. I will say, though, that, usually when you look at the cost of war, you look at how much a war is costing every day. And of course, because we're $39 trillion in debt and nobody in Washington seems to give a damn, nobody's going to be paying attention to how much this is costing the American taxpayers every day. But the one thing that they are going to see, gas prices exploding. There were a couple of gas stations around here where gas was getting close to $4 a gallon. That when you look at all the other pressures this economy is facing, that's something that, having gas, if this war continues another week, gas prices around America are going to be over $4 a gallon, most likely. That's just something, with oil over $100 a barrel, if the war continues and the straits remain closed, that's just something that American consumers are not going to take. And so there's also that clock ticking that may not have been ticking in past conflicts and past wars. But I will tell you, at this stage, all evidence suggests that Donald Trump is trying to leverage for the best deal, the best exit, not 3 months from now. I think much more likely to be sooner rather than later, even if the Defense Department's quoting Karen and Richard Carpenter with "We've only just begun." I'm curious whether they're going to have a video out with that. I doubt it.
No, probably not. So here are the latest developments with the war in Iran now in day 11. Overnight, Iranian drones were shot down over the oil-rich eastern region of Saudi Arabia, while Kuwait also shot some drones in its northern and southern areas. This comes as Pakistani warships have begun escorting its country's merchant ships to the Middle East to ensure energy supplies were not interrupted. Meanwhile, in Iran, thousands poured into the streets to celebrate the selection of the country's new supreme leader, while Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that Israel's military offensive against Iran was not done yet. This comes as Iran's foreign minister said his country was prepared to continue attacks for as long as necessary and ruled out talks after President Trump said the war would be over very soon. Meanwhile, as we've discussed, the president and members of his administration are making conflicting comments about the timeline of the war. Willie mentioned the Department of Defense social media post yesterday reading, "We have only just begun to fight." A few hours later, during a news conference in Florida, President Trump was asked about the discrepancy between some of Trump's comments and the messaging from the Pentagon.
Mr. President, you've said the war is, quote, very complete, but your defense secretary says this is just the beginning. So which is it, and how long should Americans be prepared
Well, I think
for
you could
this war
say
to
it
last
both.
for?
It's the beginning. It's the beginning of building a new country, but they have no Navy, they have no Air Force, they have no anti-aircraft equipment. It's all been blown up. They have no radar, they have no telecommunications, and they have no leadership. It's all gone. So, you could look at that statement. We could call it a tremendous success right now as we leave here. I could call it, or we could go further, and we're going to go further. But the big risk on that war has been over for 3 days.
We could go further, but here are all the things that we've accomplished. That's what the president leads with. It's something obviously that he wants the American people to hear. If he does decide to bring the troops home, in the coming days or weeks. Let's bring around columnist and associate editor at the Washington Post, David Ignatius, and also decorated combat veteran and former commander of the U.S. Army Europe, retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He's the author of a new book, and it is out today, and you have to buy it. I hear it helps your backswing.
Sing it, Joe.
Reverses male pattern baldness. It helps you lift weights like 25%. It's called If I Don't Return, a father's wartime journal. And General, we can't wait to get into that and talk to you about it. We thank you for being here on this busy day for you to help us understand what's going on with Iran. David Ignatius, let's start with you. You know, people have tried to sort through what Donald Trump is going to say, whether it was the first attack on Iran, I guess about 6 months ago, Venezuela, the attack a couple of Fridays ago when people said, oh, he can't attack tonight because if he attacks tonight, it'll make us look bad because they've got to get the response back to Geneva. They're in the middle of negotiations. Well, he used that to get the Iranians off guard. I'm wondering what your reporting's what is showing you, or what suggestion. This is sort of criminology right now, except it's just Donald Trump. We're trying to figure out because nobody else matters. He's taught us that, and the White House. I'm curious what your latest reporting is on his thinking.
So, Joe, with this series of mixed messages and often contradictory statements, it's almost like what President Trump calls the weave in his speaking style, kind of meandering back and forth. But there are several clear themes that you can distinguish yesterday, and I just want to briefly note them. First, the president does feel that he's going to be able to end the attacks on military targets soon. He had a lot of statistics. 90% of the missile launchers have been destroyed. The so-and-so number of Navy ships have been destroyed. He went through his list. He talked at one point about needing maybe another week, but he sees the end of the conflict coming. The second is that he's really worried about the Strait of Hormuz. His strongest language all through the day yesterday was about what he would do if the Iranians continued to block a transit in the Strait of Hormuz. He's worried because the effects on the global economy are really significant. The spike in prices for oil and natural gas, the effects on fertilizer markets, just a whole disparate series of economic effects are troubling the financial markets. He knows he's got to get that strait open. He's offered to escort ships through the Gulf Strait, but he's really saying to the Iranians, if you interfere with this, all hell will break loose.
David,
fire,
do you have any
fury.
suggestion at all? Do you have any evidence at all that there are talks quietly behind the scenes between the Trump administration and any representative of the Iranian government to say, we're going to finish our work here this week, we're going to pick up and leave, but you all have to guarantee that the straits are open? Any evidence that those talks are going on?
I have no evidence that actual contacts are taking place, but there's signaling through the media. I had a piece that I mentioned yesterday morning in which I quoted a senior Israeli official who laid out their case. This is the case of the defense establishment, that they're close to achieving their basic military goals, that there are other political goals that are complicated. And you heard some of that same messaging from Washington. You have various intermediaries. President Trump spoke with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. Obviously, they talked about ways to end the war. President Macron of France has reached out to China for the same reason. But that gets me to the last point I wanted to make about the themes to see in yesterday's jumble. President Trump doesn't have anybody with whom he can settle this war yet. That's really the problem that was created by the selection of Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the former supreme leader, as the new leader of Iran. This is a person who's lost his father, his wife, his son. This is a person who's not going to be eager to make a deal with the United States. He's, if anything, harder line than what came before. And that's the dilemma. Final point, one source of mine who's been in one of the Gulf states said that the leaders of that country with whom he's been talking do not want President Trump to leave a wounded, angry animal across the Gulf that's going to come back and bite them. And so I think there is this fear still that having started the war, Trump has to finish it and find someone with whom he can make a deal that will work. That person doesn't exist yet.